appropriate because it is very cold right now where we live.
The background is fake, but it is this cold.
It is really cold.
Mhm. And this is the 1908 version. There's a 1902 version, but it's a little different. So this one's the one that's most popular. So
Now
and
where we
yeah.
live. Mhm.
And we're getting this story from americanliterature.com. So shout out to them, any website that promotes literature. So thank you, americanliterature.com. And I'll put the
Yes.
link in the chat if anybody needs it.
Great. Yeah. So if you want to follow along with us, you can follow along on that website. All right. We're ready to start.
I am ready. I am ready. So I start. Let's go.
Sure.
Let's get that fire. All right. To Build a Fire by Jack London. Day had broken, cold and gray, exceedingly cold and gray, when the man turned aside from the main Yukon Trail and climbed the high earth bank, where a dim and little traveled trail led eastward through the fat spruce timberland. It was a steep bank, and he paused for breath at the top, excusing the act to himself by looking at his watch. It was 9 o'clock. There was no sun, nor hint of sun. Though there was not a cloud in the sky, it was a clear day, and yet there seemed an intangible pale over the face of things, a supple gloom that made the day dark, and that was due to the absence of sun. This fact did not worry the man. He was used to the lack of sun. It had been days since he had seen the sun, and he knew that a few more days must pass before the cheerful orb, due south, would just peep above the skyline and dip immediately from view. The man flung a look back along the way he had come. The Yukon lay a mile wide and hidden under 3 feet of ice. On top of this ice were as many feet of snow. It was all pure white, rolling in gentle undulations where the ice jams of the freeze up had formed. North and south, as far as the eye could see, it was unbroken white, save for the dark line that curved and twisted from around the spruce covered island to the south, and that curved and twisted away into the north, where it disappeared behind another spruce covered island. This dark hairline was the trail, the main trail, that led south 500 miles to the Chilcote Pass, Dyea, and Saltwater. And that led north 70 miles to Dawson, and still on the north 1,000 miles to Nulato, and finally to St. Michael on Bering Sea. 1,000 miles and a half, 1,000 more.
But all this, the mysterious, far-reaching hairline trail, the absence of sun from the sky, the tremendous cold, and the strangeness and weirdness of it all, made no impression on the man. It was not because he was long used to it. He was a newcomer in the land, a Chichequa. Did I pronounce that right?
I
And
think so. Let's
this
go with it.
and this was his first winter. The trouble with him was that he was without imagination. He was quick and alert in the things of life, but only in the things and not in the significances. 50 degrees below zero meant 80 odd degrees of frost. Such fact impressed him as being cold and uncomfortable, and that was all. It did not lead him to meditate upon his frailty as a creature of temperature and upon man's frailty in general, able only to live within certain narrow limits of heat and cold. And from there on, it did not lead him to the conjectural field of immortality and man's place in the universe. 50 degrees below zero stood for a bite of frost that hurt, and that must be guarded against by the use of mittens, ear flaps, warm moccasins, and thick socks. 50 degrees below zero was to him just precisely 50 degrees below zero. That there should be anything more to it than that was a thought that never entered his head. As he turned to go on, he spat speculatively. There was a sharp, explosive crackle that startled him. He spat again and again in the air before it could fall to the snow. The spittle crackled. He knew that at 50 below, spittle crackled on the snow. But this spittle had crackled in the air. Undoubtedly, it was colder than 50 below. How much colder? He did not know. But the temperature did not matter. He was bound for the old claim on the left fork of Henderson Creek, where the boys were already. They had come over across the divide from the Indian Creek country, while he had come from the roundabout way to take a look at the possibilities of getting out logs in the spring from the islands of the Yukon. He would be into camp by 6 o'clock, a bit after dark. It was true, but the boys would be there, a fire would be going, and a hot supper would be ready. As for lunch, he pressed his hand against the protruding bundle under his jacket. It was also under his shirt, wrapped up in a handkerchief and lying against the naked skin. It was the only way to keep the biscuits from freezing. He smiled agreeably to himself as he thought of those biscuits, each cut open and sopped in bacon grease, and each enclosing a generous slice of fried bacon. Oh my goodness, this is making me hungry.
It's
That
not
sounds
organic
really,
bacon.
really good right now.
You can't eat any of that. That's not organic. Mm, mm. It
Uh,
does sound really good though.
wow, I can't imagine 50 degrees below zero. I don't
That's
know if
cold.
I've ever been outside in weather 50 degrees below zero.
That's cold. I believe that's cold. Yeah, that's really cold. Siberia gets to be 100 below. That's why the criminals don't just necessarily escape or didn't necessarily escape. So yeah, 50 below is pretty rough. Mm, okay. He plunged in among the big spruce trees. The trail was faint. A foot of snow had fallen since the last sled had passed over, and he was glad he was without a sled, traveling light. In fact, he carried nothing but the lunch wrapped in the handkerchief. He was surprised, however, at the cold. It certainly was cold, he concluded, as he rubbed his numbed nose and cheekbones with his mittened hand. He was a warm whiskered man, but the hair on his face did not protect the high cheekbones and the eager nose that thrust itself aggressively into the frosty air. At the man's heels trotted a dog, a big native husky, the proper wolf dog, gray coated and without any visible or temperamental difference from its brother, the wild wolf. The animal was depressed by the tremendous cold. It knew that it was no time for traveling. Its instinct told it a truer tale than was told to the man by the man's judgment. In reality, it was not merely colder than 50 below, it was colder than 60 below, then 70 below. It was 75 below zero. Since the freezing point is nearly 32 above zero, it meant that 170 and 107 degrees of frost obtained. The dog did not know anything about thermometers. Possibly in its brain, there was no sharp consciousness of a condition of very cold, such as was in the man's brain. But the brute had its instinct. It experienced a vague but menacing apprehension that subdued it and made it slink along at the man's heels. And that made it question eagerly every unwanted movement of the man, as if expecting him to go into camp or to seek shelter somewhere and build a fire. The dog had learned fire, and it wanted fire, or else to burrow under the snow and cuddle its warmth away from the air. The frozen moisture of its breathing had settled on its fur in a fine powder of frost, and especially where its jowls, muzzle, and eyelashes whitened by the crystalled breath. The man's red beard and mustache were likewise frosted, but more solidly, the deposit taking the form of ice and increasing with every warm, moist breath he exhaled. Also, the man was chewing tobacco, and the muzzle of ice held his lips so rigidly that he was unable to clear his chin when he expelled the juice. The result was that a crystal beard of the color of solidity of amber was increasing its length on his chin. If he fell down, it would shatter itself like glass into brittle fragments. But he did not mind the appendage. It was the penalty all tobacco chewers paid in that country. And he had been out there before in 2 cold snaps. They had not been so cold as this, he knew. But by the spirit thermometer at 60 mile, he knew they had been registered at 50 below and at 55.
Aw, I feel so bad for the wolf. It seems like the wolf has better instincts than the human being right now.
Mhm. I imagine that's more its terrain, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
He held on through the level stretch of woods for several miles, crossed a wide flat of bleep bleep, and dropped down a bank to the frozen bed of a small stream. This was Henderson Creek, and he knew he was 10 miles from the forks. He looked at his watch. It was 10 o'clock. He was making 4 miles an hour, and he calculated that he would arrive at the forks at 12:30. He decided to celebrate that event by eating his lunch there. The dog dropped in again at his heels, with a tail drooping discouragement as the man swung along the creek bed. The furrow of the old sled trail was plainly visible, but a dozen inches of snow covered the marks of the last runners. In a month, no man had come up or down that silent creek. The man held steadily on. He was not much given to thinking, and just then, particularly, he had nothing to think about, save that he would eat lunch at the Forks and that at 6 o'clock he would be in camp with the boys. There was nobody to talk to, and there had been. Speech would have been impossible because of the ice muzzle on his mouth. So he continued monotonously to chew tobacco and to increase the length of his amber beard. Once in a while, the thought reiterated itself that it was very cold and that he had never experienced such cold. As he walked along, he rubbed his cheekbones and nose with the back of his mittened hand. He did this automatically now, and again changing hands. But rub as he would, the instant he stopped, his cheekbones went numb, and the following instant, the end of his nose went numb. He was sure to frost his cheeks. He knew that, and experienced a pang of regret that he had not devised a nose strap of the sort. Bud wore in cold snaps. Such a strap passed across the cheeks as well and saved them. But it didn't matter much after all. What were frosted cheeks? A bit painful, that was all. They were never serious. So it seems like he's just writing this off as like, oh, no big deal. I'll be at camp
Mhm.
in no time, not thinking about the reality and the danger of the temperature so dangerously low. My
I
goodness.
can't believe he doesn't have something to cover his face. I know he's chewing tobacco, but he could take a day off to cover his face up
I
because
know.
that's rough. Oh, that's rough.
Oh my
I don't
goodness.
know. Yeah, just like rough something around your head or something. I don't know, because your breath would heat up the mask. Oh, all right. Empty as the man's mind was of thoughts, he was keenly observant, and he noticed the changes in the creek, the curves and bends of timber jams, and always he sharply noted where he placed his feet. Once coming around a bend, he shied abruptly, like a startled horse, curved away from the place where he had been walking, and retreated several paces back along the trail. The creek he knew was frozen clear to the bottom. No creek could contain water in the Arctic winter, but he knew also that there were springs that bubbled out from the hillsides and ran along under the snow and on top of the ice of the creek. He knew that the oldest cold snaps never froze these springs, and he knew likewise their danger. They were traps. They hid pools of water under the snow that might be 3 inches deep or 3 feet. Sometimes a skin of ice, half an inch thick, covered them, and in turn was covered by the snow. Sometimes there were alternate layers of water and ice skin, so that when one broke through, he kept on breaking through for a while, sometimes wetting himself to the waist. That
Oh,
was why he had shied in such panic. He had felt the give under his feet and heard the crackle of a snow hidden ice skin. And to get his feet wet in such a temperature meant trouble and danger. At the very least, it meant delay, for he would be forced to stop and build a fire. and under its protection to bury his feet while he dried his socks and moccasins. He stood and studied the creek bed and its banks, and decided that the flow of water came from the right. He reflected a while, rubbing his nose and cheeks, then skirted to the left, stepping gingerly and testing the footing for each step. Once clear of the danger, he took a fresh chew of tobacco and swung along at his 4 mile gait.
In the course of the next 2 hours, he came upon several similar traps. Usually, the snow above the hidden pools had a sunken, candied appearance that advertised the danger. Once again, however, he had a close call, and once suspecting danger, he compelled the dog to go on in front. The dog did not want to go. He hung back until the man shoved it forward, and then it went quickly across the white, unbroken surface. Suddenly, it broke through, floundered to one side, and got away to firmer footing. It had wet its 4 feet and legs, and almost immediately the water that clung to it turned to ice. It made quick efforts to lick the ice off its legs, then dropped down in the snow and began to bite out the ice that had formed between the toes. This was a matter of instinct. To permit the ice to remain would mean sore feet. It did not know this. It merely obeyed the mysterious prompting that arose from the deep crypts of its being. But the man knew, having achieved a judgment on the subject, and he removed the mitten from his right hand and helped tear out the ice particles. He did not expose his fingers more than a minute, and was astonished at the swift numbness that smote them. It certainly was cold. He pulled on the mitten hastily and beat the hand savagely across the chest. Oh my goodness. Well, that's nice of him to help the poor little dog.
He
At
did it
least, at least he's trying to help him.
after he did it. Yeah, he did it to the dog.
At
Mm.
12, at 12 o'clock, the day was at its brightest, yet the sun was too far south on its winter journey to clear the horizon. The bulge of the earth intervened between it and Henderson Creek, where the man walked under a clear sky at noon and cast no shadow. At 12:30 to the minute, he arrived at the forks of the creek. He was pleased at the speed he had made. If he kept it up, he would certainly be with the boys by 6. He unbuttoned his jacket and shirt and drew forth his lunch. The action consumed no more than a quarter of a minute. Yet in that brief moment, the numbness laid hold of the exposed fingers. He did not put the mitten on, but instead struck the fingers a dozen sharp smashes against his leg. Then he sat down on a snow-covered log to eat. The sting that followed upon the striking of his fingers against his leg ceased so quickly that he was startled. He had no choice to take a bite of a biscuit. He struck the fingers repeatedly and returned them to the mitten, baring the other hand for the purpose of eating. He tried to take a mouthful, but the ice muzzle prevented. He had forgotten to build a fire and thaw it out. How could he forget that?
I know.
He chuckled at his foolishness, and as he chuckled, he noted the numbness creeping into those exposed fingers. Also, he noted that the stinging, which had first come to his toes when he sat down, was already passing away. He wondered whether the toes were warm or numbed. He moved them inside the moccasins and decided that they were numbed. Wow, so this is getting pretty bad if you can't even tell the difference.
Yeah, the pain's good. That lets you know you got some circulation, but wow. Yeah, it's sounds like it's getting rough. Hey, he forgot to build a fire. I don't understand how that's possible either. But and when he's slapping his hand against his leg to get circulation, I would think he'd just shove it in his jacket against his bare skin and let his
Yeah.
chest heat it up, you know?
Yeah,
But I don't know,
just
that's just weird.
slapping. Oh.
Yeah, that would hurt. Oh, that would sting. Anyway, he pulled the mitten on hurriedly and stood up. He was a bit frightened. He stamped up and down until the stinging returned into the feet. It certainly was cold, was his thought. That man from Sulphur Creek had spoken the truth when telling how cold it sometimes got in the country, and he had laughed at him at the time. That showed one must not be too sure of things. There was no mistake about it. It was cold. He strode up and down, stamping his feet and thrashing his arms until reassured by the returned warmth. Then he got out matches and proceeded to make a fire. From the undergrowth where high water of the previous spring had lodged a supply of seasoned twigs, he got his firewood. Working carefully from a small beginning, he stood he soon had a roaring fire over which he thawed the ice from his face and in the protection of which he ate his biscuits. For the moment, the cold of space was outwitted. The dog took satisfaction in the fire, stretching out close enough for warmth and far enough away to escape being singed. When the man had finished, he filled his pipe and took his comfortable time over a smoke. Then he pulled on his mittens, settled the ear flaps on his cap firmly about his ears, and took the creek trail up the left fork. The dog was disappointed and yearned back toward the fire. This man did not know cold. Possibly all the generations of his ancestry had been ignorant of cold, and real cold, of cold 107 degrees below freezing point. But the dog knew. All its ancestry knew, and it had inherited the knowledge. And it knew that it was not good to walk abroad in such fearful cold. It was the time to lie snug in a hole in the snow and wait for a curtain of cloud to be drawn across the face of outer space whence this cold came. On the other hand, there was the keen intimacy between the dog and the man. The one was the toil slave of the other, and the only carcass it had ever received were the carcasses of the whip, excuse me, and the only caresses it had ever received were the caresses of the whip, lash, and of harsh and menacing throat sounds that threatened the whiplash. So the dog made no effort to communicate its apprehension to the man. It was not concerned in the welfare of the man. It was for its own sake that it yearned back toward the fire. But the man whistled and spoke to it the sound of whiplashes, and the dog swung in and at the man's heels and followed after. Oof.
The man took a chew of tobacco and proceeded to start a new amber beard. Also, his moist breath quickly powdered with white his mustache, eyebrows, and lashes. There did not seem to be so many springs on the left fork of the Henderson, and for half an hour the man saw no signs of any. And then it happened. At a place where there were no signs, where the soft, unbroken snow seemed to advertise solidity beneath. The man broke through. It was not deep. He wetted himself halfway to the knees before he floundered out to the firm crust. He
Oh,
was
Lord.
angry and cursed his luck aloud. He had hoped to get into camp with the boys at 6 o'clock, and this would delay him an hour, for he would have to build a fire and dry out his footgear. This was imperative at that low temperature. He knew that much. At least he knows that much. And he turned aside to the bank, which he climbed. On top, tangled in the underbrush about the trunks of several small spruce trees, was a high water deposit of dry firewood, sticks and twigs, principally, but also larger portions of seasoned branches and fine, dry last year's grasses. He threw down several large pieces on top of the snow. This served for a foundation and prevented the young flame from drowning itself in the snow it otherwise would melt. The flame he got by touching a match to a small shred of birch bark that he took from his pocket. This burned even more readily than paper. Placing it on the foundation, he fed the young flame with wisps of dry grass and with the tiniest dry twigs. He worked slowly and carefully, keenly aware of his danger. Gradually, as the flame grew stronger, he increased the size of the twigs with which he fed it. He squatted in the snow, pulling the twigs out from their entanglement in the brush and feeding directly to the flame. He knew there must be no failure. When it is 75 below zero, a man must not fail in his first attempt to build a fire, that is, if his feet are wet. If his feet are dry and he fails, he can run along the trail for half a mile and restore his circulation. But the circulation of wet and freezing feet cannot be restored by running when it's 75 below. No matter how fast he runs, the wet feet will freeze the harder. So it sounds like he's in a lot of danger.
Yeah, I think he knows he's got some trouble coming.
I can't imagine how it would feel 75 degrees below zero. It's in the teens tonight in Atlanta, Georgia, and it feels unbearably cold outside.
He's walking it.
75 below zero.
His pace is supposed to be 4 miles an hour, which is moving really fast in snow. Because
Yeah.
walking 4 miles an hour is fast pace. So when he stops, you got to think that you would get cold fast because you're pumping when you're
Yeah.
walking. Yeah. So man, that poor fella. Yeah, when he wet his legs, that's when it was over. But yeah,
See what happens.
I know, right? What's gonna happen? That dog knows. Hmm. All this the man knew. The old timber on Sulphur Creek had told the old timer, jeez, on Sulphur Creek had told him about it the previous fall, and now he was appreciating the advice. Already, all sensation had gone out of his feet. To build the fire, he had been forced to remove his mittens, and the fingers had quickly gone numb. His pace of 4 miles an hour had kept his heart pumping blood to the surface of his body and to all the extremities. But the instant he stopped, the action of the pump eased down. The cold of space smote the unprotected tip of the planet, and he, being on the unprotected tip, received the full force of the blow. The blood of his body recoiled before it. The blood was alive, like the dog, and like the dog, it wanted to hide away and cover itself up from the fearful cold. So long as he walked 4 miles an hour, he pumped that blood willy nilly to the surface. But now it ebbed away and sank down into the recesses of his body. The extremities were the first to feel its absence. His wet feet froze the faster, and his exposed fingers numbed the faster, though they had not yet begun to freeze. Nose and cheeks were already freezing, while the skin of all his body chilled as it lost its blood. But he was safe. Toes and nose and cheeks would only be touched by the frost, for the fire was beginning to burn with strength. He was feeding it with twigs the size of his finger. In another minute, he would be able to feed it with branches the size of his wrist. And then he could remove his wet foot gear, and while it dried, he could keep his naked feet warm by the fire, rubbing them at first, of course, with snow. The fire was a success. He was safe. He remembered the advice of the old timer at Sulphur Creek and smiled. The old timer had never been very serious in laying down the law that no man must travel alone in the Klondike after 50 below. Well, here he was. He had had the accident, he was alone, and he had saved himself. Those old timers were rather womanish, some of them, he thought. All a man had to do was to keep his head, and he was all right. Any man who was a man could travel alone, but it was surprising the rapidity with which his cheeks and nose were freezing, and he had thought his fingers could go lifeless in so short a time. Lifeless they were, for he could scarcely make them move together to grip a twig, and they seemed remote from his body and from him. When he touched a twig, he had to look and see whether or not he had hold of it. The wires were pretty well down between him and his finger ends.
It's kind of ironic how he doesn't trust the old timer. He thinks the old timer isn't as wise as he is. It's kind of arrogant not to
Well, that
trust.
stupid, that womanish old timer
Yeah, it's kind
like
of
that. Yeah,
sexist and ageist right there.
just a little bit. Well, the old timer's probably warm somewhere. So.
Yeah,
Mhm.
he should have trusted him. All
Mhm.
of which counted for little. There was the fire, snapping and crackling and promising life with every dancing flame. He started to untie his moccasins. They were coated with ice. The thick German socks were like sheaths and iron halfway to the knees, and the moccasin strings were like rods of steel, all twisted and knotted as by some conflagration. For a moment he tugged with his numbed fingers, then realizing the folly of it, he drew his sheath knife. But before he could cut the strings, it happened. It was his own fault, or rather, his mistake. He should not have built the fire under the spruce tree. He should have built it in the open. But it had been easier to pull the twigs from the brush and drop them directly on the fire. Now the tree under which he had done this carried a weight of snow on its boughs. No wind had blown for weeks, and every bough was fully frighted. Each time he had pulled a twig, he had communicated a slight agitation to the tree, an imperceptible agitation for so far as he was concerned, but an agitation sufficient to bring about the disaster. High up in the tree, on one bough, capsized its load of snow. This fell on the boughs beneath, capsizing them. This process continued, spreading out and involving the whole tree. It grew like an avalanche, and it descended without warning upon the man and the fire was blotted out. Where it had burned was a mantle of fresh and disordered snow. The man was shocked. It was as though he had just heard his own sentence of death. For a moment he sat and stared at the spot where the fire had been. Then he grew very calm. Perhaps the old timer on Sulphur Creek was right. If he had only had a trail mate, he would have been in no danger now. The trail mate could have built the fire. Well, it was up to him to build the fire over again, and the second time there must be no failure. Even if he succeeded, he would most likely lose some toes. His feet must be badly frozen by snow, and there would be some time before the second fire was ready.
Oh, it's getting bad. He's going to lose a few toes
At the very least, yeah.
at the very least. Yeah. Well, he's got his shoes off right now, right? Doesn't he have his
Yeah.
shoes on? Yes. Oh, that's not going to go well. Why'd he build it underneath the tree? Anyway, such were his thoughts, but he did not sit and think them. He was busy all the time. They were passing through his mind. He made a new foundation for a fire, this time in the open, where no treacherous tree could blot it out. Next, he gathered dry grasses and tiny twigs from the high water flotsam. He could not bring his fingers together to pull them out, but he was able to gather them by the handful. In this way, he got many rotten twigs and bits of green moss that were undesirable, but it was the best he could do. He worked methodically, even collecting an armful of larger branches to be used later when the fire gathered strength. And all the while the dog sat and watched him, a certain yearning wistfulness in its eyes, for it looked upon him as the fire provider, and the fire was slow in coming. When all was ready, the man reached in his pocket for a second piece of birch bark. He knew the bark was there, and though he could not feel it with his fingers, he could hear its crisp rustling as he fumbled for it. Try as he would, he could not clutch hold of it. And all the time, in his consciousness, was the knowledge that each instant his feet were freezing. This thought tended to put him in a panic, but he fought against it and kept calm. He pulled on his mittens with his teeth and thrashed his arms back and forth, beating his hands with all his might against his sides. He did this sitting down and stood up to do it. And all the while the dog sat in the snow, its wolf brush of a tail curled around warmly over its forefeet, its sharp wolf ears pricked forward intently as it watched the man, and the man as he beat and thrashed his arms and hands. felt a surge of envy as he regarded the creature that was warm and secure in its natural covering.
I find this relationship between the man and the wolf interesting.
Yes, the wolf's entertained.
After a time, he was aware of the first faraway signals of sensation in his beaten fingers. The faint tingling grew stronger till it evolved into a stinging ache that was excruciating, but which the man hailed with satisfaction. He stripped the mitten from his right hand and fetched forth the birch bark. The exposed fingers were quickly going numb again. Next, he brought out his bunch of sulphur matches, but the tremendous cold had already driven the life out of his fingers. In his effort to separate one match from the others, the whole bunch fell in the snow. He tried to pick it up out of the snow, but failed. The dead fingers could neither touch nor clutch. He was very careful. He drove the thought of his freezing feet and nose and cheeks out of his mind, devoting his whole soul to the matches. He watched, using the sense of vision in place of that of touch. And when he saw his fingers on each side of the bunch, he closed them. That is, he willed to close them. For the wires were drawn and the fingers did not obey. Ah, he pulled the mitten on the right hand and beat it fiercely against his knee. Then, with both mittened hands, he scooped the bunch of matches along with much snow into his lap. Yet he was no better off. Ugh, I really admire the way this is written right now because you can clearly like visualize, like imagine him just trying to like pick it up with his frozen fingers and his brain body connection doesn't work because his fingers are frozen.
He's doing these things, yeah.
Yeah. After
Mm.
some manipulation, he managed to get the bunch between the heels of his mittened hands. In this fashion, he carried it to his mouth. The ice crackled and snapped. By a violent effort, he opened his mouth. He drew the lower jaw in, curled the upper lip out of the way, and scraped the bunch with his upper teeth in order to separate the match. He succeeded in getting one, which he dropped on his lap. He was no better off. He could not pick it up. Then he devised a way. He picked it up with his teeth and scratched it on his leg. Oh, so he's literally like
Yeah, that's so on his leg though, so he's bent over. Oh
20
no.
times he scratched. 20 times he scratched before he succeeded in lighting it. As it flamed, he held it with his teeth to the birch bark. But the burning brimstone went up his nostrils and into his lungs, causing him to cough spasmodically. The match fell into the snow and went out. Wow. Very vivid writing. You can really visualize what's happening. The poor guy with his teeth, he's like holding the match like this. He's like, ah, ah, ah.
Where did you get that?
This is a cute tip. All right, carry on.
Keep Q-tips by the podcast. I got you. Hmm. The old timer on Sulphur Creek was right, he thought in the moment of controlled despair that ensued. After 50 below, a man should travel with a partner. He beat his hands, but failed in exciting any sensation. Suddenly, he bared both hands, removing the mittens with his teeth. He caught the whole bunch between the heels of his hands. His arm muscles not being frozen enabled him to press the heels tightly against the matches. Then he scratched the bunch along his leg. It flared into flame, 70 sulfur matches at once. There was no wind to blow them out. He kept his head to one side to escape the strangling fumes and held the blazing bunch to the birch bark. As he so held it, he became aware of the sensation in his hand. His flesh was burning. He could
Mhm.
smell it. Deep down below the surface, he could feel it. The sensation developed into pain that grew acute, and still he endured it, holding the flame of the matches clumsily to the bark that would not light readily because his own burning hands were in the way, absorbing most of the flame. At last, when he could endure no more, he jerked his hands apart. The blazing matches fell sizzling into the snow, but the birch bark was alight. He began laying dry grasses and the tiniest of twigs on the flame. He could not pick and choose, for he had to lift the fuel between the heels of his hands. Small pieces of rotten wood and green moss clung to the twigs, and he bit them off as well as he could with his teeth. He cherished the flame carefully and awkwardly. It meant life, and it must not perish. The withdrawal of blood from the surface of his body now made him begin to shiver, and he grew more awkward. A large piece of green moss fell squarely on the little fire. He tried to poke at it with his fingers, but his shivering frame made him poke too far, and he disrupted the nucleus of the little fire, the burning grasses and the tiny twigs separating and scattering. He tried to poke them together again, but in spite of the tenseness of the effort, his shivering got away with him, and the twigs were hopelessly scattered. Each twig gushed a puff of smoke and went out. The fire provider had failed. As he looked apathetically about him, his eyes chanced on the dog, sitting across the ruins of the fire from him in the snow, making restless, hunching movements, slightly lifting one foot and then the other, shifting its weight back and forth on them with wistful eagerness.
The sight of the dog put a wild idea into his head. He remembered the tale of the man caught in a blizzard who killed a steer and crawled inside of the carcass and so was saved. He would kill the dog and bury his hands in the warm body until the numbness went out of them. Then he could build another fire. He spoke to the dog, calling it to him, but in his voice was a strange note of fear that frightened the animal, who had never known the man to speak in such a way before. Something was the matter, and its suspicious nature sensed danger. It knew not what danger, but somewhere, somehow, in its brain arose an apprehension of the man. It flattened its ears down at the sound of the man's voice, and its restless, hunching movements and the liftings and shiftings of its 4 feet became more pronounced, but it would not come to the man. He got on his hands and knees and crawled toward the dog. This unusual posture again excited suspicion, and the animal sidled mincingly away. The animal's instincts are smarter than this man. The man sat up in the snow for a moment and struggled for calmness. Then he pulled on his mittens by means of his teeth and got upon his feet. He glanced down at first in order to assure himself that he was really standing up, for the absence of sensation in his feet left him unrelated to the earth. His erect position in itself started to drive the webs of suspicion from the dog's mind. And when he spoke pre- pre-
Preemptively.
preemptively, with the sound of whiplashes in his voice, the dog rendered its customary allegiance, and came to him. As it came within reaching distance, the man lost his control. His arms flashed out to the dog, and he experienced genuine surprise when he discovered that his hands could not clutch, that there was neither bend nor feeling in the lingers. He had forgotten for the moment that they were frozen and that they were freezing more and more. All this happened quickly, and before the animal could get away, he encircled its body with his arms. He sat down in the snow and in this fashion held the dog while it snarled and whined and struggled.
Dun dun dun. That dog will take him anyway. Those big snow dogs. He's not going to take that. Ooh, ooh, yeah, he's in trouble. I think he lost all his matches, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm just picturing him holding this poor dog that's like struggling to get away. he's just desperately trying anything he can to survive at this point.
Oh yeah, yeah. He's got some trouble ahead. Hmm.
All
Should have
right.
listened to the womanish old timer,
I know.
but it was all he could do. Hold its body encircled in his arms and sit there. He realized that he could not kill the dog. There was no way to do it. With his helplessness, with his helpless hands, he could neither draw nor hold his sheath knife nor throttle the animal. He released it, and it plunged wildly away, with tail between its legs and still snarling. It halted 40 feet away and surveyed him curiously, with ears sharply pricked forward. The man looked down at his hands in order to locate them and found them hanging on the ends of his arms. It struck him as curious that one should have to use his eyes in order to find out where his hands were. He began thrashing his arms back and forth, beating the mitted hands against his sides. He did this for 5 minutes violently, and his heart pumped enough blood up to the surface to put a stop to his shivering, but no sensation was aroused in his hands. He had the impression that they were hung like weights on the ends of his arms, but when he tried to run the impression down, he could not find it. A certain fear of death, dull and oppressive, came to him. This fear quickly became poignant as he realized that it was no longer a mere matter of freezing his fingers and toes or losing his hands and feet, but that it was a matter of life and death with the chances against him. This threw him into a panic, and he turned and ran up the creek bed along the old dim trail. The dog joined in behind and kept up with him. He ran blindly, without intention, in fear such as he had never known in his life. Slowly, as he plowed and floundered through the snow, he began to see things again: the banks of the creek, the old timber jams, the leafless aspens, and the sky. The running made him feel better. He did not shiver. Maybe if he ran on, his feet would thaw out. And anyway, if he ran far enough, he would reach camp and the boys. Without doubt, he would lose some fingers and toes and some of his face, but the boys would take care of him and save the rest of him when he got there. And at the same time, there was another thought in his mind that said he would never get to the camp and the boys, that it was too many miles away, that the freezing hand had too great a start on him, and that he would soon be stiff and dead. This thought he kept in the background and refused to consider. Sometimes it pushed itself forward and demanded to be heard, but he thrust it back and strove to think of other things.
Yes, it
So,
seems like he's trying all he can to suppress the dark thoughts and hang on to hope that he's going to survive.
mm,
It struck him as curious that he could run at all on feet so frozen that he could not feel them when they struck the earth and took the weight of his body. He seemed to himself to skim along above the surface and to have no connection with the earth. Somewhere he had once seen a winged Mercury, and he wondered if Mercury felt as he felt when skimming over the earth. His theory of running until he reached camp and the boys had one flaw in it. He lacked the endurance. Several times he stumbled, and finally he tottered, crumpled up, and fell. When he tried to rise, he failed. He must sit and rest, he decided, and next time he would merely walk and keep going. As he sat and regained his breath, he noted that he was feeling quite warm and comfortable. He was not shivering, and it even seemed that a warm glow had come to his chest and trunk. And yet, when he touched his nose or cheeks, there was no sensation. Running would not thaw them out, nor would it thaw out his hands and feet. Then the thought came to him that the frozen portions of his body must be extending. He tried to keep this thought down, to forget it, to think of something else. He was aware of the panicky feeling that it caused, and he was afraid of the panic. But the thought asserted itself and persisted until it produced a vision of his body totally frozen. This was too much, and he made another wild, long run along the trail. Once he slowed down to walk, but the thought of the freezing extending itself made him run again. So he's just continuing to try to run.
I
Wow,
think he's in hypothermia now, so he's because he can't feel anything, so he's numb.
sounds
Yeah,
like
full on hypothermia. Because you're supposed to, when they find people in the snow and they've frozen to death, a lot of times they're naked because they think they're hot at the very last, and they'll start peeling clothes off. Um, ooh. Anyway, and all the time the dog ran with him. Good dog. At his heels. When he fell down a second time, it curled its tail over its 4 feet and sat in front of him, facing him, curiously eager and intent. The warmth and security of the animal angered him, and he cursed it till it flattened down its ears appeasingly. This time the shivering came more quickly upon the man. He was losing in his battle with the frost. It was creeping into his body from all sides. The thought of it drove him on, but he ran no more than 100 feet when he staggered and pitched headlong. It was his panic. It was his last panic. When he had recovered his breath and control, he sat up and entertained in his mind the concept of meeting death with dignity. However, the conception did not come to him in such terms. His idea of it was that he had been making a fool of himself, running around like a chicken with his head cut off. Such was the simile that occurred to him. Well, he was bound to freeze anyway, and he might as well take it decently. With his newfound peace of mind came the first glimmerings of drowsiness. A good idea, he thought, to sleep off to death. It was like taking an anesthetic. Freezing was not so bad as people thought. There were lots worse ways to die. He pictured the boys finding his body the next day. Suddenly he found himself with them, coming along the trail and looking for himself. And still with them, he came around a turn in the trail and found himself lying in the snow. He did not belong with himself anymore, for even then he was out of himself, standing with the boys and looking at himself in the snow. It certainly was cold, was his thought. When he got back to the States, he could tell the folks what real cold was. He drifted on from this to a vision of the old timer on Sulphur Creek. He could see him quite clearly, warm and comfortable, smoking a pipe.
you were right, old Hoss. You were right, the man mumbled to the old timer of Sulphur Creek. Then the man drowsed off into what seemed to him the most comfortable and satisfying sleep he had ever known. The dog sat facing him and waiting. The brief day drew to a close in a long, slow twilight. There were no signs of a fire to be made, and besides, never in the dog's experience had it known a man to sit like that in the snow and make no fire. As the twilight drew on, its eager yearning for the fire mastered it, and with a great lifting and shifting of 4 feet, it whined softly, then flattened its ears down in anticipation of being chidden by the man. But the man remained silent. Later, the dog whined loudly, and still later, it crept close to the man and caught the scent of death. This made the animal bristle and back away. A little longer it delayed, howling under the stars that leaped and danced and shone brightly in the cold sky. Then it turned and trotted up the trail in the direction of the camp it knew. Where were the other food providers and fire providers? Wow. Well,
Oh,
I
wow.
guess
Yeah.
I guess this is a cautionary tale. Uh
Listen to the old man from Sulphur Creek.
yeah, to not be so arrogant to think you know more than someone older and more experienced than you. And also, this is very much like a man versus nature story. I like these stories about like human hubris and when humans think that they're smarter than nature, or when humans think they can control nature, they have more power than nature. I
Hmm.
like the whole human versus nature stories because it's a good cautionary tale to us all.
You probably lose every time.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and I like the themes of, human fragility, um, to not be careless with your life, to not make decisions just because, to err on the side of caution, right? We're
Hmm.
very fragile. We're fragile creatures. And I also really like how the wolf is sort of depicted as smarter than the man instinctually. Like his instincts are smarter than the man.
Hmm. Oh, here, so this one, the Yukon River is 3,000 miles long. It originates in British Columbia, and then it goes northwest uh, uh, and ends at the Bering Sea. It goes toward Alaska. So that's the area. And this story is about this is where all the people were going. Jack London was there in 1897, and that was a year after the gold rush in that area kicked in. And so
Hmm.
everybody was there dealing with the cold and the snow to try to find gold. And 100,000 prospectors were there. He was one of them. And then he got scurvy and he got hip pains, probably from snowshoeing, because snowshoeing wears your hips out.
Yeah.
And then he got a gum alignment issue and he lost a bunch of teeth or four. And he just ended up writing a story. But yeah,
Oh,
so
wow.
that's what the guy's there for. The guy's there to take gold out of Mother Nature. So
Yeah.
he's getting punished a little bit, but that's sad. I
Yeah.
don't know. You know.
Interesting. So I can see the influence. So Jack London himself got scurvy.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah. That's just from just being out in the cold too often without any I guess you wouldn't have any vitamin C. You wouldn't have any um, lemons or limes or oranges or anything.
Yeah.
you'd be stuck out there. So because that's what they call the British the limey. They call them limeys.
Yeah.
Because they used to suck on limes to keep from getting
Yeah.
scurvy. Yeah. So, but yeah. So Jack London would have seen this stuff firsthand.
Hmm.
It's interesting. All the prospectors, and in California too, the prospectors on these gold rushes, the big businesses when they come later, they do pretty well financially. But all the individual prospectors and all the gold rushes didn't do well at all. Most
Yeah.
of them, hardly any of them, made anything in the end. The people who made money during the gold rushes were the businesses that, that set up there, provided food, shelter, clothing, tools, things like that. Those are the places, the people that really made their money. The very, very few stories about people, individual stories like Jack London or this fella that
Yeah.
did well. Most of them got spanked.
Yeah.
So there it is.
I guess this perhaps is somewhat of a commentary about perhaps greed and arrogance and hubris and disrespecting the elderly.
Yeah.
And I do like the parts where he's sort of having to face his mortality, the parts where the way Jack London describes him trying to put those thoughts in the back of his mind. Like at first, it's like he doesn't want to accept that he is likely to die. Like he doesn't want to accept it. And then finally, he has to accept it. And then he has to make peace with it in some way.
Mhm.
Um,
And the guy's a bit conflicted, or he seemed like he was conflicted with who his adversary was. Because I keep referring to the womanish comment that he made, but he's taking opposition with that old man as if he's in some sort of a contest, a masculinity
yeah,
type contest with this old man. But in reality, his contest is with Mother Nature.
yeah,
Has nothing to do with that old man. That old man, if
yeah,
anything, is a foreboding character, a warning. But he kind of makes
yeah.
it to where, no, I'm better than this old guy. That ain't about that. You can beat him all day long. This is the thing you're up against right now is the cold.
Hmm.
And kind of lost that because he's pushing back against the ideas that old man has, but he's fighting a different adversary while he does it. And losing. So, oh, that's a great
Yeah,
story. Though. You like it though?
I do like it. This sort
Do you
of
remember it
reminded
from
me,
this?
what?
Do you remember it like this when you were a kid?
No, I don't remember it this vividly at all.
Mhm.
This also reminded me of a time years ago, like not that long ago, probably like 7, 8 years ago, a friend of mine convinced me to go hiking in the cold in North Georgia to try to camp. And neither
Mm.
one of us really knew how to camp. And we brought like an electric heater with us. And it definitely was not nearly this cold. It was probably like not even freezing. It was probably like a little above, like probably in the teens.
Where are
I'm
you going to plug in a heater, though? Where would you plug in
what?
a heater? Where
Is
would
it
you plug in a heater?
one of those heaters that was battery operated?
Really? And they
Yeah, it
last?
was a dumb idea, is my point.
Okay.
And and we kept walking, and I started to feel kind of a little bit of numbness in my feet. Obviously, nowhere close to what this character would feel, but still, like,
Yeah, you didn't die.
yeah, yeah, numbness. And I kept thinking, like, neither one of us have camped before. It's just the two of us. This is a stupid idea. But my friend was like, no, we got to find this spot. We got to find this waterfall. It's really great. We got to find it. And so we kept walking. And then we tried to set up the tent, but the tent itself was like falling over. Like we didn't set it up very well. And then we turned on the heater because it was a battery operated heater and it just wasn't really doing anything. And then I remember thinking like, I don't think I can sleep when it's this cold. And again, it wasn't like it was probably in the teens, maybe 20s, but we had like a big sleeping bags and everything, but I was like, I don't think I can sleep. And so finally we decided to just leave and go to my friend's house, who wasn't too far. And I just remember immediately started this huge, as soon as we walked in the door, my friend Robert was like, come on in. And he started this huge fire, and the fire felt so good. Um, but I don't know. I kept thinking like when I was reading this story how like human beings just, we make stupid decisions sometimes with our like arrogance and
Hmm.
we're not, camping is one of those things you shouldn't do unless you're really prepared.
That's
Um
fair. And
this
try as
story,
you may, alcohol does not help.
yeah.
Um, yeah, because like a lot of homeless people will drink alcohol to try to make themselves, they feel warmer when they drink it, but in reality, they're much colder.
Well, yeah, it's the illusion. Like you think you're
Mhm.
warmer, but you're not. And you just you might feel more comfortable, but you're actually in more danger that way.
Yeah.
And this also reminded me of a story I read when I was a kid called The Little Match Girl. Did you ever read that story? The
No.
Little
Uh-uh.
Match Girl. So
Mhm.
comment if you're familiar with The Little Match Girl. It's actually like a really sweet story in some ways.
Mhm.
Um, Mopar says this story has been made into a movie. I didn't know
Yes, I saw
that.
that too in 2018.
You
Give me
saw
just a
the
second. I'll be right
movie?
back. No, I just saw the comment for it. I'll be right back.
Oh yeah, I didn't know this was made into a movie. Mopar, did you see the movie? I wonder if the movie's any good. I remember watching the film Into the Wild, and Into the Wild is sort of like a similar theme, man versus nature, a man trying to survive on his own. I think one of my favorite wilderness survival stories is the movie with Tom Hanks, Survivor, where he makes friends with an old soccer ball. I think that's probably my favorite Survivor movie.
Sure. What's that about?
But I also really like the film Into the Wild.
Oh, no, no, not into the wild. No, we
But you
can't do
didn't
that.
like it?
No, the only book he brought with him was on plants, and he ends up eating plants that kill him.
Yeah.
It's
But
kind of,
it's like a similar theme. It's kind of like,
no, I get you. I get
yeah.
you. So when I was a kid, we spent a lot of summers and winters in West Virginia, and it would get pretty cold there. But I remember we were in the mountains of Charleston, West Virginia, which is And anybody knows what that is, that's where all the horror movies come from. Like your car breaks down and they come get you.
Yeah.
But we were leaving after a Christmas event, and it was nighttime, and it was snowing really good. And I remember we got in the car, and I guess my dad, to try to be provocative or something, he pointed at a telephone pole in the distance or a tree in the distance. And he said, if we had to get out and walk to that right now, we would freeze to death before we got there. And I thought, my brother and I both looked at each other and we're both thinking, what if the car breaks down? Because we're getting ready to drive through the mountains of West Virginia for a good hour before we see any
Yeah.
humans. So, what a great way to scare me.
Yeah.
That's like, yeah. It's like we were both just scared to death because thinking, gosh, the car's going to break down. We're going to try to walk to the next pole and die.
Oh my
But
goodness.
yeah, I did. One time I was hiking. I don't know if it was in Minnesota or West Virginia. I forget where it was, but it was cold. It might have been Connecticut. But anyway, and I remember I slipped on some ice and I fell, and I don't know if I got knocked out or something, but I woke up and I was still out on my back and it was a little darker outside. And I remember it was really, I wasn't cold. I almost felt like I could go back to sleep. Like I feel like I could just go to sleep like that. But if I would have, I don't think I would have made it because it was
No.
cold. It was so cold. But I just felt okay about it. I had my hands in my pockets. I slipped like that, had my hands in my pockets, and I woke up and I was just looking up, and the sky was a lot darker, and I just felt like, man, I could just go to sleep right now. It was just comfortably numb, I guess is the word or the
Oh
phrase.
yeah.
But
Comfortably numb. I think there's a
mhm,
song called Comfortably
there
Numb.
it is. There's a
Song
song that
lyrics.
has that. Yeah, it has that song lyric, but they're talking about drugs. Mm,
Yes. Yeah.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah. But anyway, Jack London, there's another story by Jack London that's about the cold. I haven't looked into it, but we could always do it at some point. But
yeah.
um, he was around the same time as Mark Twain and all that. So his literature would have been competing with him. So because Mark Twain was what, just post Civil War, and this is early 1900s. So these guys would have run into each other maybe. I think. But
Mopar says, no, I was meaning different movie. Perfect Storm. This is a story. It has been into a movie. It has a similar plot, man against nature, man's arrogance. Oh yeah, a movie called
is that the
Perfect.
one with Mark Wahlberg where they're on the ship with George Clooney?
Huh.
Isn't that Perfect Storm?
I
Or is
never
that a
saw
different?
that film, but that does sound familiar.
But there is a
Oh,
movie for To Build a Fire, but it's a short movie.
oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah. And there's another one I saw at a 3D theater where it had um, Val Kilmer, and it's an excerpt from a longer movie where his plane crashes in like the Andes or something, and he's hiking, but he keeps hallucinating about his wife trying to get back to her. And
I
it was a
see.
really good movie. I don't know what that was from, but this reminds me of the movie with the gray. The really scary movie with the wolves and all that stuff. I can feel
I
the
know the
cold
movie
like
you're
that.
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the cold like that because this is. Oh, so he did say yes, that movie. So there you go.
Castaway is the movie I was talking about with
That's
Tom
pretty
Hanks.
good.
That's
Where
probably
he
my
falls in love with the
favorite.
volleyball.
Yes, that's probably my favorite man versus nature, man surviving on his own kind of film. Um,
Hmm.
I thought it was just really well made, and I like that it's hopeful at the end.
They said they were gonna re-release the movie, or Disney was, but they were gonna make it more woke. So Wilson was gonna be a football.
No,
I know, but that's funny though. I don't know if it's true, but it's funny. It's funny on so many levels.
how would a
But anyway.
football be more woke?
Well, you gotta think about it. Yeah, but it's it's got
Oh my goodness.
it's more woke. It's more woke because it's a football.
So
Mm,
do we love this story? Do we hate this story? Somewhere in the middle?
I love it.
I love it because it's a good cautionary tale to respect nature and to respect your elders and not be so
Yes,
arrogant to think that you have more power than nature.
yes, and maybe look at because the dog at the beginning is walking kind of depressed because it doesn't want to go because it doesn't seem like it's a good idea. And the guy gets there when he starts
Yeah,
freezing to death. So the dog
yeah,
was telling him ahead of time, like, no, this ain't a good idea. We shouldn't be doing this.
yeah.
So maybe pay attention to the dog. Um,
Something about the description of like the wolf dog reminded me a little bit of White Fang too. Um, have you ever seen White Fang?
That sounds familiar, but I don't know.
Oh, it's such a good film. I think you would love it because I know you love dogs and animals. Like, I think you would love White Fang.
Who
You
doesn't love a good dog?
you
Yeah.
have to see that movie. It's a
Mm-hmm.
classic with Ethan Hawke. I think you would love it. You'd
White
probably,
Fang.
it wouldn't surprise me. I would bet you money it would make you cry.
That can be. Well, if
Uh,
he's got, is he out there with like, I vaguely have some knowledge of he's running a team of like snow dogs, or I don't know what they call them. Is that what they?
no dogs.
Maybe I'm aware of it. I don't think I've seen it though. But
You
Ethan
have to
Hawke's
see
a
it.
good actor. Ethan
I
Hawke's a
think
good actor.
everything I
Mm.
know about you makes me think you would really like it. Okay, so we also have a very short story that
Oh,
has,
the guy said one of them said the Revenant.
yes, The Revenant is
That
another
is a
person
great.
feature story.
That's very much on the money for this too. Yeah.
Yes, and I've never
Yeah.
seen The Revenant, but I probably should.
That
Um,
movie is intense. I mean,
yeah,
and there's scenes in it where just the way it's shot, it's not 3D. If it were, it's not 3D, but it just comes at you. It's so the way they shoot it. There's a scene where they're standing this and these arrows are being shot, and the way the cameras shoot taking them, you just feel like you're there. It's so well done that whoever filmed that just, I mean, everybody's acting is great and it's a great movie, but the way it's filmed, it's like the lens is long one direction. It's hard to
yeah.
explain, but it's so well done. But yeah, that's a great example of a
Yeah,
movie.
I
Mhm.
I have a hard time watching people suffer. And so that's why
There's a
I have
lot of it in that movie.
and I know it's pretend, but it's also kind of based on a true story. So I just like
Mhm.
I it might be hard for me to watch it, but maybe one day I'll watch it.
Oh,
Um,
but you did see the scene, Empire Strikes Back, where they cut open the creature that their mule or whatever it was, and he stuffs Luke in it so he won't freeze to death. Remember that? That's in the Empire Strikes Back.
so I
Remember?
must have seen that, but
Takes the lightsaber and cuts him open, cuts the creature open. The creature
I don't
just
remember that
yeah.
scene, but I must have seen it at some point.
Oh. Empire Strikes Back, the best one.
I think all the Star Wars films are great. Uh,
All of them? You don't talk about those first three.
well, I mean, I think there's some that are definitely better than others, but I think all of them are like well-made films.
That's fair. They all have kind of their own place in the genre, I guess, if you do it that way. I'll
Yeah,
take it
for
that way.
sure.
Oh, so
All
you
right.
want to do this next one?
Yes, so just so we end on a happier, lighter, fuzzy feeling sort of note, I would like to
Yay.
read this other story. It's a lot shorter, but it's a fun little children's story that you found called The Mitten.
The
Yeah.
Mitten. Yeah.
You want
And
to
it's
share anything else about the story before we start? You can also find this on.
I sent the link in the chat.
Okay, good. Oh, you posted the link. Okay, so the link to The
And it's
Mitten.
and it's from a flip book site that flip HTML, and somebody has a site where they put books in there and you just look as though you're flipping the book while you do it. So whoever come up with that idea, it's awesome. This is a scholastic book, and this is a story that's famous in the Ukraine. So
Okay,
it's a famous Ukrainian story. So it's this maybe guess well, I mean that's the way it's pitched. So anyway, I think that's kind of cute, because I
great. So
imagine
this
it's
is The
really cold. It'd be
Mitten. And who
really
is the
cold in Ukraine.
author?
Adapted and illustrated by Jen
Jan
Brett,
Jan Brett.
but I
Okay.
think it's Eric something. Eric, what does that say? Eric, the Mitten by yeah, I guess it's just Jan Brett.
Yes, so this is the Jan Brett version of The Mitten. So if you want to read and follow along, the link is in the description. Cool. So this will be a cute one. I've
You
never
reading this?
I've never heard of this story, so I'm excited to
It's
read
cute.
it for
It's
the
cute.
first
It's
time.
simple and nobody dies.
Okay, cool. I figure we need to have at least one story that's all fuzzy feelings. So we can just alternate pages if you'd like.
I'm down. You want to do page one?
Sure.
All right.
Mitten. And the front of it is really cute. It's like this snowy scene with like an owl and a I see a fox. a raccoon, a bunny, a bear, and it seems like they're all staring at this mitten in the snow.
Don't leave out the mouse. And then there's
And
a
there's a little
owl.
mouse. That's true. There's a mouse, and there's some other animal buried in the sand, it looks like.
Oh, that's what is a weeble wobble? I can't remember what those things are called. Shoot. But yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, doesn't matter. Oh, and anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll think of it. Mm.
The
It's a
mitten.
bunch of animals, and they're all tickled by somebody's mitten.
Yes.
Mm.
The Mitten, adapted and illustrated by Jan Brett. Once there was a boy named Nicky who wanted his new mittens made from wool as white as snow.
At first, his grandmother, Baba, did not want to knit white mittens. If you drop one in the snow, she warned, you'll never find it.
But Nicky wanted snow white mittens, and finally Baba made them.
After she finished, she said, when you come home, first, I will look to see if you are safe and sound. But then I will look to see if you still have your snow white mittens.
So off Nicky went, and it wasn't long until one of his new mittens dropped into the snow and was left behind.
A mole. That's what it was. A mole, tired from tunneling along, discovered the mitten and burrowed inside. It was cozy and warm and just the right size, so he decided to stay.
A snowshoe rabbit came hopping by. He stopped for a moment to admire his winter coat. It was then that he saw the mitten, and he wiggled in it, feet first. The mole didn't think there was room for both of them. But when he saw the rabbit's big kickers, he moved over.
Next, a hedgehog came shuffling along. Having spent the day looking under wet leaves for things to eat, he decided to move into the mitten and warm himself. The mole and the rabbit were bumped and jostled, but not being ones to argue with someone covered with prickles, they made room. Oh,
As soon as the hedgehog disappeared into the mitten, a big owl, attracted by the commotion, swooped down. When he decided to move in also, the mole, the rabbit, and the hedgehog grumbled. But when they saw the owl's glinty talons, they quickly let him in.
up through the snow appeared a badger. He eyed the mitten and began to climb in. The mole, the rabbit, the hedgehog, and the owl were not pleased. There was no room left. But when they saw his diggers, they gave him the thumb. Oh,
It started snowing, but the animals were snug in the mitten. A waft of warm steam rose in the air, and a fox trotting by stopped to investigate. Just the sight of the cozy mitten made him feel drowsy. The fox poked his muzzle in. When the mole, the rabbit, the hedgehog, the owl, and the badger saw his shiny teeth, they gave the fox lots of room.
oh. Let's see. A great bear lumbered by. He spied the mitten all plumped up, not being not one to be left out in the cold. He began to nose his way in. The animals were packed in as tightly as could be. But what animal would argue with a bear?
The mitten swelled and stretched. It was pulled and bulged too many times its size. But Baba's good knitting held fast.
Let's see. There it goes. Along came a meadow mouse, no bigger than an acorn. She wriggled into one space left and made herself comfortable on top of the great bear's nose.
The bear, tickled by the mouse's whiskers, gave an enormous sneeze. Achoo! The force of the sneeze shot the mitten up into the sky and scattered the animals in all directions.
On his way home, Nicky saw a white shape in the distance. It was the lost mitten silhouetted against the blue sky.
As he ran to catch his snow white mitten, he saw Baba's face in the window. First, she looked to see if he was sage and sound, and then she saw that he still had his new mittens.
Yay.
That was cute. In terms of loving, hating, or in the middle, I would say I love that one because it's short, it's sweet, and it's cute. And I like the illustrations here are really fun. Like all these animals crowding in this mitten. It's really funny.
It's cute. I figure you'd like the phrase sage and sound. I feel like that fits your temperament.
Sage and sound. Yes.
Instead of safe and sound, it's just sage and sound.
Yeah, and it's I like
It would
how
make a nice name for a girls' alternative rock band.
Sage and Sound. Yeah, I could see that. Sage
Yeah,
and Sound as like a band name.
maybe like a duet group. They do dueling guitars or something. Maybe one of them plays a violin. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sage and sound. Yeah.
I could see that as like a bluegrass, almost like or like Celtic music. Like hippie kind of Celtic music, Sage and Sound.
Yeah, maybe Enya meets Morricone, Enrico
Yeah,
Morricone, something like
something
that.
like that.
I'll take it. Yeah, so you like this one? You're good for that?
Yeah, I love this one. I thought it was cute. And it
I
also
originally thought that they took turns in the mitten. I didn't realize that they actually uh, all got in there together, which makes it adorable. And you like the flip book thing, the way it's the website flips, lets you
Yeah,
flip the page
I
and
like
everything.
how the website's laid out, and I love the illustrations. The illustrations are really great. I
That's
also
pure
like,
HTML, by the way, if anybody needs to know. That's where we're getting it. It's a great
yes,
website where they have books you can flip through. So,
yeah, it's a great story for kids. I also like how it it shows the animals how they initially distrust, like they don't want to include the animals at first, and then they decide, okay, there's something good in every animal, and then they all snuggle in together. Um, I don't know. I thought it was pretty cute.
so he calls his grandmother Baba, and
Mhm.
Baba is a term of endearment for a grandmother in many cultures, and is often used to show love, respect, and close familial bond. In Russia, it's bababushka. In Ukrainian, it's babusie, which is the formal term for grandmother, and Baba is a charming nickname. In French, it's Baba. In French and Polish, it literally means old woman or peasant woman. In Asian countries, Baba it refers to the father, wise old man, saint, priest. Arabic, it translates to father. It's a surname in Japanese and Dravidian. That's interesting. So that's kind of a neat thing. So he calls his mom Baba. That's
Yeah.
cute.
I also
Hmm.
like how the mitten is sort of symbolic of generosity, but also like limited resource. So it's like, what do you do? How generous can we be within limited resources?
Hmm.
And I like that it shows the theme of sharing, which
Hmm.
is, a good theme for kids to share.
Hmm. When all
So
the animals kept taking turns getting in there, I really thought for a minute that there was going to be some old dude kind of stumble along, running up the slopes
yeah.
in a mad frenzy and just dive in the mitten. You're like, you don't know what it's been like out there. The old man was right. Could somebody build a fire? Do one of you know how to build a fire? There's a dog behind me. He wants to get in too. Oh,
That
oh
was
yeah.
a funny way to. I kept wondering, okay, how is this going to end? Because eventually, they're just like in life, we have limited resources on this planet. And
Hmm.
eventually, they're going to reach their limit. But I also like how it subtly teaches accepting diversity because all the animals are so diverse. And so, like, the animals that are sharing the mitten, they're initially like put off by the difference, and then
Hmm.
they accept them. So it's also about community and sharing and accepting each other, even though you're all different. But then limited resources. So I don't know.
Yeah.
if you think about it, in some ways, it has some deeper themes that are good for kids to kind of, to share with kids in a very subtle way.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean
Coexistence.
they're all sharing. That's one stretchy glove though, because I mean wasn't a lot of room at first, and then a bear's in there and every other creature. So it's yeah, it's cute. That's cute though.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, Baba must have some serious knitting skills.
right. And just funny, she said, first I'm gonna make sure you're healthy, and I'm gonna make sure you got those gloves, because if I'm knitting these, then you know. But maybe that's because it's white. That's why all the animals climb into it. But
Because it's white. What?
I mean, because it looks like the snow.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's warm. It's like the warmth in the snow. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, it's a cute story though.
Hmm.
Hmm. But yeah, it's cute. I think that would be something. I would read that to a little kid. It's not gonna, it's not gonna spring up too much traction. And I think that's a timeless story, right? It's timeless.
Yeah.
Like it's not gonna be one that gets banned later or something.
I can't
Like,
see any reason someone would ban that story.
not yet. Give it time. We'll think of something. But right now, it seems like a story that would hold out. It's pleasant. It's yeah, and it teaches sharing and warmth and the familial spirit. So
Yeah, community, coexistence.
mhm.
Mopar says that was a cute little story. Cool. Well, if you're listening at home, let us know what you thought of our stories that we read and discussed. If you love them, if you hated them, or if you felt somewhere in the middle, I'd be curious to know what you thought. And if there are any other stories that you would like us to read and discuss here on this podcast, comment below, let us know. Um, yeah,
We got
anything
an
else?
itinerary coming up, so we got some. It'd be a lot of cold stuff this month. So
Yes, all throughout December, we're going to have a theme of winter. So we'll probably read a few holiday, family-friendly themed stories, anything related to winter, the holidays, things like that. So it'll be
they'll
fun.
all make you feel cold and want to fire.
It'll all make you appreciate having a warm, cozy house if you have one.
Hmm.
So
Yes.
stay tuned, pay attention to our community page, and we'll post when we're going to do the next one on the community page. And in the meantime, feel free to comment with any suggestions you have and any thoughts you have. Anything else you want to chat about before we call it for tonight?
No, I think it was fun, and the to build a fire was a good that's a good welcome, what good story. It was good to get reacquainted with that. It looks like it looks like a middle school kid story, so that's probably a pretty good guess at how long ago it's been since each of us probably had any experience with it. So
Yeah, I
it's
hadn't read
that's
that
good.
story since I was probably 11 years old, and I forgot
Yeah,
a lot of it.
and that's the cool thing when you read something when you're a kid and then you go back and read it again, you read it with adult eyes as opposed to kid eyes. So maybe you find different things. Maybe different things mean something to you.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I remember the story. The only thing I remember was him trying to grab that dog, trying to
That's
catch
what
it.
you remember
Yeah.
from it?
Yeah, that's the thing I
Yeah.
remember. I remember a lot of that stuff, but those are just, a little older, maybe you just other things kind of ring with you a little bit more so. Um,
It's
so
interesting
another one,
that
yeah.
you remember the moments with the dog because knowing you, I know how you have this sensitivity towards animals. And so
Mhm.
I think that's interesting that that's the part that you remember from childhood.
I just remember the dog not the dog knowing that he's trying to get at him and it's not going to work. Um,
I
but
am
the
happy
same
that the
thing.
dog survived. That did make me
I am too.
happy.
I am too. Yeah, the dog shouldn't go anywhere. He didn't do anything wrong. He or she didn't do anything wrong. But but I mean, I guess the same thing with this Ukrainian story. Um, we'll revisit in 10 years, 20 years. It might mean a whole different story to you. You know.
Yeah, that's what's cool about reading stories at one point in your life when you're younger and then reading them when you're older. You can experience them and appreciate them on different levels. And you
Mhm.
probably interpret them totally differently at different points in your life. So,
And and that's I see a lot of movies and whatnot where they'll do re-releases and re-releases, and it seems like they're trying to counter that, like they're trying to age it so it stays relevant, but I kind of want it to sit back there, right? And stay
mhm.
and get kind of dusty so you can go dust it off. There's a movie, do you know there's a movie they filmed in 2015 that they're not going to release till 2000, 115. They're
Wow.
purposely letting it age. I heard that. That's an interesting idea because that's the idea of it. It's going to be released for 100 years after it was filmed.
Huh.
That's a chance. So,
Yeah.
but
That's pretty
it's
interesting. And the reason for that is because
I don't know, bad marketing. I'm not sure. But no, I mean, I don't. That's why I guess I'm kind of going against the re-releases and whatnot. Is it's better to let it kind of let it get old, let it have that. I don't know, a little bit of what is it? Um, starts with a P. Patina. Let it have a little patina on it, a little rust, a little personality. Needs to get
Yeah,
yeah.
there's certain things that are very unique to that time period
Mhm.
that, if you rewrite them in modern day, you lose some of the original magic, I feel, of
Mhm.
that. You lose the uniqueness of that particular period of time. So,
Oh, and I don't think we mentioned it, but we'll it real quick because I think we just skirted right by it. Or but we bleeped a word in the story,
that's right.
and I won't bother for it. I don't like omitting language. I would rather keep it. So we specifically did that so you know that it's there. If you want to go look it up, you want to find out. It's just a word that was a little more colloquial, I guess, at that time period, but probably now it might hurt somebody's feelings, and that's kind of something when we do the podcast, we want to make sure everybody feels happy and whatnot. This is supposed to be an upbeat time of the year and whatnot, but we're not hiding it. We're not going to whitewash it away or something, but it's very much there. And if you want to research it and look it up, Jack London put it in there for a reason. I don't know what it was, but it's there. So yeah, if you want to look it up, you're certainly welcome to the story that we have in the link. It has it in there. You're certainly welcome to look it up.
Yeah.
But yeah, but past that, it's your own history. But do your thing.
Yeah, it was the moment that I said bleep bleep. So if you're curious what that bleep bleep word is, you'll probably understand why I bleep bleeped
Yeah,
it.
if we didn't, YouTube probably would have anyway.
But
So
yeah, comment below and let us know what you think of these stories. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. And in the meantime, stay warm and cozy.
build a fire.
Yeah. All
Mhm.
right. Till